He defied the alien warrior, drinking the water he offered, leaving her speechless. Caleb Reynolds stood on the cracked earth of his family's once thriving farm, watching the wind stir the ashes of what used to be his home. The distant, thunderous hum of an approaching ship broke the eerie silence, vibrating through the air like the deep growl of a predator stalking its prey. The sky, once a canvas of vibrant blue, now shimmered with the fading light of a sun that had witnessed too much death, too much destruction. The fields that had once fed families for generations were now nothing more than scorched remnants. His crops, reduced to dust, had been trampled by alien boots. His family home, where laughter and love had once echoed, was nothing but charred rubble. The farm had been in his family for 5 generations, but now it was nothing more than a graveyard of memories. At 29, Caleb's face was etched with the deep lines of hardship. He had seen the world he loved ripped apart, piece by piece, by invaders who cared nothing for the people or the land they destroyed. His vivid blue eyes, once full of the fire of youth, now burned with something different, a cold determination. He had lost everything, but he was still standing. Brutus, the chestnut stallion, nudged Caleb's arm as if sensing his master's inner turmoil. Caleb stroked the horse's mane, whispering quietly, "It's just you and me now, old friend." He grabbed the wooden bucket at his side, the last of the day's water ration, and walked to the trough where his few remaining animals drank. The land had been barren for months, and water had become as precious as gold. But he would make do. He always did. As he set the bucket down, the familiar hum returned, now louder, more insistent. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He had heard that sound before, too many times. It was the sound of a ship descending, an omen of death, destruction, and conquest. But this time it was closer, too close. And as the humming grew louder, Caleb realized that there was nowhere to run. The ship appeared over the horizon, its sleek hull cutting through the sky like a shadow. It was not one of the massive warships that had leveled cities, but a scout vessel, smaller, faster, and far more precise. Caleb didn't need to see more to know what it meant. They had come for him, for whatever was left of humanity on this broken world. He dropped the bucket, watching as it rolled into the dirt, the water spilling out. He didn't have time to waste. There was no use running. They were faster, stronger, and if they wanted him dead, they would make sure it happened before he could take a single step. So he did what any self-respecting farmer would do in the face of certain death. He stood tall and faced the ship. He wasn't afraid of death. He was afraid of what it would mean if he didn't resist. The ship's engines rumbled as it touched down 100 yards from him, sending a cloud of dust into the air. The hatch opened with a soft hiss, and a squad of armored figures emerged, moving with the deadly precision of a well-trained military unit. They were tall, humanoid, but their armor gleamed with alien technology, gleaming silver and blue, with golden accents that shimmered like a deadly crown. And then she stepped out. Commander Virabalcaraz, Supreme Commander of the Dominion Forces, the scourge of humanity's last hope. Caleb's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment the world seemed to freeze. She was tall, taller than any human woman. Her deep azure skin glowed in the setting sun, absorbing the last rays of light as though she were part of the dying landscape. Her silvery white hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall of starlight. Her battle-worn armor, adorned with blue metallic plates and golden embellishments, accentuated her striking presence. But it was her eyes, piercing, cold, and calculating, that held Caleb's gaze. "Human," she spoke, her voice smooth and melodic, yet laced with a sharp edge. "You stand on territory now claimed by the Astral Dominion. Identify yourself." Caleb didn't flinch. He didn't need to. He had lost everything, and yet somehow he had gained something greater in the process, an unbreakable will. He met her gaze, steady and unwavering. "This is my farm. What's left of it anyway?" he said, his voice low but steady. Vira's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into something akin to a sneer. "I am Commander Virabalcaraz, Supreme Commander of the Dominion Forces. Your planet's resources are now property of the Dominion." Caleb's eyes flicked to the bucket at his feet. He picked it up without breaking eye contact, holding it out to her. "Water," he said simply. The commander's expression shifted momentarily from disgust to confusion. No human had ever dared offer her something, much less something as simple as water. Her hand twitched toward her weapon instinctively, but she hesitated. Why? Why was this human, this farmer, acting so differently from the others? Without a word, Caleb raised the bucket to his lips and drank deeply, his throat working as he swallowed. Water spilled down his chin, soaking his shirt, but he didn't care. He emptied half the bucket before lowering it, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Suit yourself," he said quietly, his blue eyes never leaving hers. Something flickered across Commander Vira's face, a brief, almost imperceptible change. For the first time since landing on this planet, she didn't see a human to destroy. She saw something else, something unexpected. The contempt she had held for him, for all humans, shifted just a little. "Hold position," she ordered her squad, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. "This one interests me." Caleb, oblivious to the stir he had caused, turned back to the trough and began to pour the rest of the water for his horses. The sound of the alien soldiers setting up camp behind him didn't bother him. What was more important now was the quiet dignity that had survived this war, and how long it would last. If Commander Vira and her forces were truly here to conquer, then they had underestimated humanity's greatest weapon, its will to survive. The unlikely encounter. The stars were starting to pierce the deepening night sky as Caleb worked, his hands steady despite the tension gnawing at his chest. He moved with the ease of someone who had spent his entire life in the fields, his fingers worn and calloused from years of hard labor. But tonight, under the cold gaze of the alien forces camped just a stone's throw away, it felt different. The world had shifted beneath his feet, and there was no turning back. The commander had stayed in the distance, observing him with an intensity that made the air around him feel charged. Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that she was studying him, not just as a threat, but as something unexpected. He didn't know why he offered her the water. Maybe it was a last-ditch effort to cling to the humanity he had left. Maybe it was simply the old instinct his father had taught him, to offer hospitality even when it cost you everything. Whatever it was, he knew that the moment he handed her the bucket, things had changed. The fire crackled quietly by his shelter, a crude lean, made from salvaged barn timbers. He tossed another log onto the flames, the soft warmth a small comfort against the overwhelming cold of the night. The Dominion soldiers, however, didn't seem to notice the chill. They were more concerned with setting up their perimeter, their movements precise, efficient. Caleb had to admire their military discipline, even if it was pointed in the wrong direction. "Suit yourself," he muttered to no one in particular, lowering himself to the log by the fire. Just then Caleb heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching, the crunch of boots on the dry earth. He turned his head, and there she was, Commander Vera, her presence undeniable even in the dark. She moved with the same purpose as her soldiers, but there was something different about her now. Her armor gleamed under the moonlight, but her face, those cold, piercing eyes, seemed softer somehow. Not as hard, not as distant. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon," Caleb said, his voice steady as he glanced at the empty space beside him. He gestured to the log. "It's not much, but it's all I've got." Vira hesitated. It was brief, but Caleb noticed it, the faintest flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She had been trained to lead, to command, to crush. But here, in this moment, there was no enemy to fight. Just two beings, two survivors, in a world that had forgotten what kindness even meant. She walked over and sat across from him, her movements graceful, her battle-worn armor clinking softly as she adjusted herself. There was an intensity to her, an aura of control that didn't fade even in the stillness of the night. She was a commander, a conqueror, and yet here she was, sitting beside a human, one of the very species she was meant to eliminate. "I've been watching you," Vira said, her voice quieter than before, almost hesitant. "I don't understand. Most species would attack or run, but you—" She paused, as though searching for the right words. "You stood your ground." Caleb raised an eyebrow, the flickering firelight casting shadows across his face. "Running? Pointless. And attacking you? Well, that'd just be stupid." Vira's lips twitched at the corner, the briefest hint of amusement crossing her face. But then, her expression hardened again, as if reminding herself who she was. "You're not like the others." "Guess that's why you're still here," Caleb replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't trust her, not yet. The war had taught him to trust no one, not even those who seemed to show a little mercy. Her pale eyes studied him, and for a moment Caleb could almost feel the weight of her thoughts pressing on him. She was calculating, always assessing, but beneath it there was something else. Curiosity, intrigue. "Why didn't you fight back?" she asked, her voice low. "Why offer me water?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a piece of dried meat, tearing off a small piece and chewing it slowly. He wasn't sure what kind of answer she expected, but the truth was simple enough. "My father taught me that strength isn't about crushing your enemies. It's about knowing when to offer a hand, even when you have nothing left to give." He glanced at her, his blue eyes hard but honest. "Hospitality doesn't cost much, but the absence of it, well, it costs everything." Vira was silent for a long time. The only sound between them was the crackling of the fire, the occasional shift of the wind. Caleb could feel her studying him, her gaze piercing, trying to figure out what made him different from the others. The others who had cowered, begged for mercy, or fought uselessly against an unstoppable force. "Where did you learn that?" she asked, almost too quietly, as if the question had surprised her even as she spoke it. "From my family," Caleb replied, his voice softening just a little. "From the land. We were farmers. It was the only way we could survive, the kindness. The land gives and we give back." Vira shifted slightly, and Caleb noticed her gaze flicker toward the horses by the trough. "You care for them," she said, her voice oddly distant, as though she were speaking to herself. "Even when your own survival is uncertain." Caleb looked over at his horses, then back at her. "Someone has to," he said simply. For a moment, Vira said nothing. Her eyes softened just slightly, as if she were seeing something new, something human, in him that she hadn't expected. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the cool, commanding mask she had worn when she first arrived. "They're just animals," she said, almost dismissively. But Caleb noticed the hint of hesitation in her tone. She didn't believe her own words. "No," Caleb disagreed, his voice firm. "They're more than that. They've helped me survive, and I'll be damned if I let them suffer because of your war." Vira stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to reconcile the image of the man before her with the image of the enemy she had been trained to destroy. And for a brief instant, something passed between them. Something deeper than the lines of battle. Something human. But before either of them could speak again, a commotion broke out among the soldiers near the perimeter. Vira's gaze snapped toward the noise, her military instincts kicking in immediately. Caleb knew that she wasn't here for small talk. She was here to do her job. But for that one fleeting moment, it felt as if the war, at least for them, had been put on hold. The unseen spark. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the ground as the silence stretched on. Caleb had noticed the shift in Vira's demeanor. She was different now, not just another alien conqueror, but someone caught between two worlds. She wasn't here to destroy him. Not yet, anyway. But Caleb knew better than to believe that was some sort of victory. The war wasn't over, and neither was his fight for survival. The wind picked up, rustling the remnants of the land around them. The faint hum of the Dominion camp behind them was a constant reminder of the soldiers, of the power that could wipe him out with a flick of a switch. Yet here they sat, human and alien, staring into the same fire, sharing the same strange moment of stillness. Vira shifted slightly, her silvery hair catching the light from the fire as she glanced over at the distant horizon. "This planet's resources are vast," she said, as if trying to put words to a thought she hadn't fully processed. "But I am not here for your crops or your animals." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you here?" She met his gaze, and for the first time since their encounter, there was something almost human in her eyes, something not entirely cold. "I don't know yet," she said, her voice a low murmur, almost like a confession. Caleb wasn't sure what to make of that. The commander of an alien invasion force admitting uncertainty. It didn't fit the picture he had in his mind. But the longer he stared at her, the more it seemed like there was more to her than the mask of a conqueror. "Is that why you didn't just kill me when you had the chance?" he asked, his voice steady but with an edge of curiosity. Vira's expression hardened, the old mask of authority returning. "I don't need to explain myself to you," she snapped, though the sharpness in her tone lacked its usual bite. It wasn't a threat, it was more like an instinctual defense. Caleb didn't back down. He had nothing left to lose. "If you think killing me is going to win this war, you're wrong. You don't know us. You think you're the first to come to this world to take what you want. We've been fighting for survival longer than you think. But that doesn't mean we won't show you respect, even when we have nothing left to give." For a long moment, Vira didn't speak. She just stared at him, and for the first time since their meeting, there was a flicker of something different in her eyes, something more than contempt. It was then that the quiet was shattered. A sharp crack from the edge of the camp, followed by the unmistakable hiss of a communication device, pulled both of their attention away from each other. Caleb's muscles tensed. The reality of the situation returned like a slap across the face. This wasn't a moment for philosophical debates about humanity or aliens. The war was still on, and it was only a matter of time before they would come for him, for his farm, for his life. Vira stood quickly, her eyes flashing with military precision, and motioned to the soldiers who had been keeping watch. "What is it?" she demanded, her voice once again commanding and authoritative. A soldier rushed over, a look of urgency in his eyes. "Commander, we've picked up movement near the west border. It appears to be humans." Vira's face darkened. "Humans this late in the day?" "Possibly survivors from the resistance," the soldier continued, lowering his voice. "They're moving in the shadows. Should we engage?" Caleb's heart skipped a beat. Resistance. There were others out there. He had thought he was the last one, the only human left in this wasteland. His family had been wiped out, and the rest of the survivors had been scattered by the relentless alien assault. If there were others, he wasn't as alone as he had thought. Vira paused, considering the report, her gaze flicking back to Caleb. For a moment she seemed to hesitate, torn between her duty to the Dominion and the strange pull she felt toward this human. The resistance, if they were indeed alive, could complicate everything, but something else gnawed at her. She had seen countless species submit without question, but humans were different. This one, Caleb, he didn't act like the others. He didn't show fear. He didn't beg for mercy. He simply stood, defiant in the face of their invasion. Finally she spoke. "Prepare a team, we'll make contact, no weapons unless necessary." The order was what Caleb had expected. He had assumed she would call for a full assault, wiping out whatever humans dared to resist. But Vira was different, and that difference unnerved him more than the threat of annihilation itself. The soldiers moved out, spreading through the perimeter, their figures dark against the blue glow of the camp's lights. Vira looked back at Caleb, her gaze unreadable. "Stay here," she commanded. "I don't want you causing trouble." Caleb opened his mouth to protest but held back. He wasn't about to run or hide. He wasn't going to play the helpless victim anymore. "I don't need you to tell me what to do," he said, his voice firm. But Vira was already turning away, her boots crunching the ground beneath her, as she walked toward the group of soldiers. Before she could disappear into the shadows, Caleb's voice called out to her one more time. "Commander," he said, his voice quieter now, almost as if he were speaking to an equal. "If you really want to know why I didn't fight back, it's because I still believe there's something worth fighting for." Vira stopped, her back still to him, her profile framed by the dying firelight. For a moment she didn't move, didn't answer. But then, with a subtle gesture, she nodded, almost imperceptibly. She didn't have to say anything. Her actions had already begun to speak louder than words ever could. Caleb watched as she disappeared into the night, her soldiers following closely behind. And for the first time since the invasion began, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Not just for him, but for humanity as a whole. The war was still on, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way out of it. The test. The night stretched on, thick with tension. Caleb sat by the fire, his hands still aching from the day's work, but his mind racing in 1,000 different directions. The Dominion soldiers had set up their camp a little farther off, the hum of their technology filling the air like a constant reminder of the force that stood against him. Vira had led her team out, leaving Caleb alone with the quiet of the land, the familiar sounds of the wind and distant wildlife masking the unease growing in his chest. What did she want with him? He had thought at first that she would kill him, but no, she seemed intrigued. There was something more to her than just the cold conqueror he had expected, and that thought unsettled him more than anything. He didn't have time to dwell on it for long. The sound of boots crunching over gravel jolted him from his thoughts. He turned, eyes narrowing as a figure approached. It was Lieutenant Marin, one of Vira's officers, his posture rigid and formal as he walked up to Caleb. "Commander Vira requests your presence," Marin said, his tone respectful but with a certain coldness that told Caleb not to expect pleasantries. "The tests will begin soon." Tests? Caleb's heart skipped a beat. He had known it was coming. He had heard rumors from the few survivors who managed to escape the alien onslaught. The Dominion wasn't known for mercy. They didn't just invade, they experimented. The idea of being a specimen didn't sit well with Caleb, but he had no choice. He pushed himself off the log and stood, brushing the dirt from his hands. "Lead the way." Marin didn't speak, but he turned on his heel and began walking toward the center of the camp. Caleb followed silently, the weight of the moment pressing down on him with every step. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew this wasn't going to be easy. When they reached the center of the camp, Caleb's eyes immediately went to the strange contraption standing in the middle of the area. It was like a metallic platform, covered in wires and glowing with energy. Several soldiers were busy adjusting equipment around it, and Vira stood off to the side, watching as they worked. She didn't look up at Caleb when he arrived, but her presence was unmistakable. "You're a strong one," she said without turning to him, her voice measured. "You may prove more useful than I initially thought." Caleb didn't know how to respond. He wasn't here to be useful. He was here because they had taken everything from him, and now they wanted to test his limits. He had no illusions about what this was, but he wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Vira finally turned to face him, her eyes cold, but there was something else there now, something flickering just beneath the surface. "This will be a simple test," she said, her tone clinical. "We'll start with something basic. You may not survive it, but that's not important. It's about understanding what you are capable of." "Bring it on," Caleb said, his voice calm but his muscles tensed in anticipation. He wasn't sure what he was facing, but he was ready. Without a word, Vira nodded to her soldiers. One of them activated the machine in the center of the camp. Caleb stepped forward, standing tall as the machine hummed to life, sending out a pulse of energy that made the air around him hum with static. The first test was simple enough. Caleb was instructed to stand still as the machine emitted a field, a sort of gravitational force that pushed against him, simulating an environment with higher gravity. He could feel the weight on his body immediately, his knees buckling slightly under the strain. But Caleb clenched his jaw, planting his feet firmly on the ground. This wasn't the first time he'd fought the land. He had spent years working under the harsh sun, lifting heavy loads, carrying bales of hay and logs. His body was built for this, and he wasn't going to let this machine defeat him. Vira's eyes were locked on him, studying his every move, her arms crossed as she watched him struggle. Most species would collapse under this kind of pressure, she said, almost to herself. But not you. Caleb gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand straight. Sweat dripped from his brow, his muscles screaming in protest, but he didn't falter. He was used to pain. He had lived with it for years, whether from the grueling labor on his farm or the loss of everyone he had ever known. The pressure doubled. Caleb's breath came in heavy gasps now, his body trembling with the effort, but he held firm. "Is that all you've got?" he called out, his voice strained but defiant. Vira raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised at his resilience. "Interesting," she muttered under her breath, but she didn't let up. The pressure doubled again. This time, Caleb's knees buckled slightly. His back felt like it was going to snap, and his vision blurred from the strain. But he refused to fall. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "Enough," Vira finally said, a touch of admiration creeping into her voice. The pressure lifted and Caleb collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, his muscles on fire. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, glaring up at her. "That's the best you can do." Vira looked down at him, her face unreadable. "You're stronger than I thought. You may even have potential." She stepped closer to him, her voice lowering. "But strength is not enough. You must prove more than just physical endurance. We will see how you handle something more complex." Caleb could feel the weight of her gaze on him, but he didn't flinch. He was done with running, done with hiding. Whatever she threw at him, he would face it. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," he said, his voice steady, even as his body screamed for rest. Vira nodded, turning her back to him. "Prepare for the next phase of your test, human," she said, and Caleb could hear the faintest hint of something, almost like respect in her tone. "The real test begins now." The unseen spark. The night was thick with uncertainty as Caleb sat alone by his fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows against the desolate backdrop of his farm. The tests had been grueling, each one pushing him further than the last. But there was a strange feeling in the air tonight. The constant hum of the Dominion camp, the churning of their technology, and the cold eyes of Commander Vira. They all seemed distant now, like ghosts lurking on the edge of his perception. He had felt the weight of their gaze for so long, but tonight it was different. Tonight, the world felt quieter, more fragile. He stared at the fire, feeling the warmth on his face but not quite able to shake the chill in his bones. Every part of him screamed to hold on, to resist, to never give in. But as the last remnants of daylight faded into a black void, Caleb found himself wondering, how much longer could he keep standing? How much longer could he keep fighting? He had nothing left but his will. The distant crackle of footsteps on gravel broke the silence. Caleb's muscles tensed instinctively, his hand resting on the worn handle of a knife he'd kept hidden for emergencies. His eyes flicked toward the source of the noise, but when he saw who it was, he relaxed, the tension in his chest easing slightly. It was Vira. She approached slowly, her figure bathed in the soft glow of the firelight, her silvery hair catching the faintest hint of moonlight as it swayed with each step. There was something different about her now, something more human. Her presence, once commanding and cold, now carried a strange weight of vulnerability. Caleb had seen it before, brief flickers of hesitation, a momentary lapse in her calculated demeanor. But tonight it seemed different. Tonight it was impossible to ignore. She stopped just beyond the fire's reach, her arms crossed, her eyes studying him with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "You've proven yourself resilient, Caleb Reynolds," she said, her voice soft but firm. "That's not something I've seen often." Caleb didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her, trying to read between the lines of her words. He had spent the last few days expecting the worst from her, but there was something almost genuine in the way she spoke, something that hinted at a crack in her icy exterior. He finally spoke, his voice steady, though tinged with the exhaustion of the past few days. "What do you want from me, Commander? I've passed your tests, survived your games. I don't know what else you expect." Vira's gaze softened just for a moment. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished, replaced by her usual stoic mask. "I expect nothing," she said, almost too quickly. "I'm simply assessing, trying to understand why you're different from the others." "Different?" Caleb scoffed, his voice rising with frustration. "You think I'm special. You think I'm some kind of anomaly. I'm just a man trying to survive, same as anyone else." Vira's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time Caleb saw a flicker of something deeper in them. "No," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "You're not like the others. You don't beg. You don't fight blindly. You simply endure. And that—" She trailed off, her eyes narrowing as if she were piecing together something that hadn't quite made sense. Caleb felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't want to hear it, didn't want to think that there was something more to this alien invasion than just the destruction of his world. But there was a strange, undeniable pull in the air, something that made him question everything he had known. "You're not here to conquer me, are you?" he asked suddenly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "Not like the rest of them." Vira didn't respond immediately, but her posture shifted slightly, as if she were deciding whether or not to tell him the truth. "I follow orders," she said at last, her voice almost distant. "And the orders are clear: eliminate the resistance, take control, but you make me question that. I haven't felt hesitation in years." Caleb studied her carefully, his heart pounding in his chest. "You're not like them," he said, the realization dawning on him. "You don't want to wipe us out. You're here because you're forced to be." Vira's eyes widened slightly, as if she had been caught off guard by his words. "I am not forced," she said quickly, her voice tinged with defensiveness. "I choose to serve the Dominion. I choose to—" "Serve?" Caleb interrupted, his voice rising with bitterness. "You're not serving anyone, you're just following orders, orders that will destroy everything. And for what? Resources, power." She stared at him, her expression unreadable. "You don't understand," she said, the faintest hint of frustration creeping into her voice. "This is bigger than you or me. This is about survival. The Dominion has conquered countless worlds. This is what we do. This is how we ensure the survival of our people." Caleb shook his head, the weight of her words settling heavily on his chest. "And what about us? What about humans? What about the people you're crushing under your boot?" Vira's gaze hardened, but there was something in her eyes, something like regret. "I didn't choose this war, but it's happening, and I will do my duty." The air between them crackled with tension. Caleb wanted to shout, to scream at her, to demand she see the destruction she was helping to cause. But instead, he stayed silent, watching her closely. He had spent so much time hating the aliens, hating what they had done to his world. But now, sitting across from her, he couldn't help but wonder if there was a part of Vira that wasn't completely lost, a part of her that still had the capacity for change. "You've been trained to see us as enemies," Caleb said softly, his voice raw with emotion. "But what if we're not the enemy? What if you've been made to fight a war you don't even understand?" Vira didn't respond, but Caleb saw her eyes flicker, just for a second. A crack in her armor. Something shifted in her, something that made her question everything she had believed. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Caleb allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something else. Something different. Something that didn't involve complete annihilation. The breaking point. The air was thick with the sound of distant murmurs and clattering equipment as the Dominion camp hummed with activity. Caleb sat by the fire again, his body sore from the tests, his mind still reeling from the conversation with Vira. The quiet of the night felt almost surreal, like the calm before a storm that had been brewing for far too long. As he looked out over the scorched land, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting, something deep within the heart of the Dominion forces and within Vira herself. The commander, once so rigid in her authority, had started to show cracks. For the first time, Caleb felt a glimmer of hope, but he knew that hope was dangerous. It was fragile, like glass ready to shatter. A sudden, sharp noise broke through his thoughts. It was the unmistakable sound of a Dominion soldier approaching, and Caleb's senses snapped to attention, instinctively reaching for the makeshift weapon hidden beneath his coat. He didn't trust them. Not yet. Caleb Reynolds, a voice called out in the darkness, cool and familiar. It was Vira. He stood quickly, wiping the dirt from his pants, but didn't move toward her. He wasn't sure what to expect. Was this another test? A trap? She had already caught him off guard once before, and he wasn't about to make that mistake again. She stepped into the firelight, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. But tonight, she seemed different, more human, almost hesitant. The cold precision of her military bearing was still there, but something softer lurked beneath the surface. "You've done well," she said, her voice carrying a rare note of respect. "But now you will face something more." Caleb's brows furrowed. "What do you mean, another test?" Vira didn't respond immediately. Instead, she glanced toward the camp where her soldiers were preparing for something. Her eyes, those pale, almost silver eyes, were sharp, calculating. For a moment, Caleb saw a flash of vulnerability, but it was quickly masked by her commanding presence. "Not a test," she said, her voice steady. "An order. I have been instructed to bring you in for further assessment. Your physical endurance has exceeded expectations, but there are other factors to consider. Your psychological resistance, for one." Caleb took a step back, his mind racing. "You're not planning on making me a lab rat, are you?" Vira's expression softened just slightly, as if she were considering his words carefully. "This isn't about experiments, not anymore." Her words hung in the air like a confession, and Caleb's pulse quickened. Something was happening, something beyond his understanding. He had expected violence, destruction, but now he saw a different side to Vira, a side that might not be entirely loyal to the Dominion's cause. But before Caleb could press her further, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Commander, we've got trouble." The interruption was jarring. Vira's head snapped toward the voice, her body going rigid. The moment was over. Her mask of control slipped back into place. "We need to move," she said, her tone hard once more. "Get to the perimeter now." Without waiting for a response, she turned and stalked toward the gathering soldiers, leaving Caleb standing in the midst of the growing chaos. His heart pounded in his chest as the reality of the situation hit him like a blow. Something was coming, something big. Vira hadn't explained what it was, but the urgency in her movements told him it wasn't good. "Stay close," she called back to him, her voice sharp with command. Caleb hesitated for a split second before following. This wasn't the time to question. He could feel the weight of something ominous building in the air, and he wasn't about to let it catch him off guard. As they moved through the camp, Caleb noticed a subtle shift in the soldiers' demeanor. They were no longer acting like the well-oiled machine they had been earlier. There was tension, fear, even a trace of uncertainty in their movements. Something was wrong. Vira led him toward the edge of the camp, her expression hardening. "Stay here," she ordered as she signaled for her squad to spread out. Caleb opened his mouth to protest, but she was already gone, disappearing into the shadows with her soldiers. He clenched his fists, trying to ignore the rising panic in his chest. He wasn't sure what was coming, but he could feel it, a deep, primal sense of danger that gnawed at his insides. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The sound of distant rumbling reached Caleb's ears. It was faint at first, like the growl of an approaching storm, but it was growing louder, closer. Then the ground beneath him trembled. Something massive was moving toward them. Caleb's heart raced as the rumbling grew into a full-throated roar. The Dominion soldiers were already bracing for impact, their weapons raised and ready. But Caleb could tell this wasn't something they were prepared for. The air suddenly shifted, like a pressure change before a storm. Vira's voice rang out through the night. "Prepare for battle." The order hit Caleb like a slap, and his body reacted instinctively. His heart pounded in his chest as the camp erupted into motion. Vira and her soldiers rushed into position, weapons drawn, scanning the horizon. Caleb followed the line of their gaze, his eyes narrowing. The silhouette of something enormous loomed in the distance, its outline jagged against the night sky. A massive ship, much larger than any scout vessel, was descending. Its shape was ominous, angular, like a predator closing in on its prey. Vira's voice cut through the chaos. "It's the flagship, Thorax is here." The name struck Caleb like a punch. Thorax, Vira's superior, the one responsible for the Dominion's ruthless campaign. Caleb's blood ran cold as he realized what this meant. Vira's hesitation, her strange shift in behavior, it all made sense now. Thorax was here to put an end to whatever had been happening between her and Caleb. He was here to finish what had been started. Vira turned to face Caleb, her expression unreadable. "This is where the test ends." Caleb's stomach churned. The breaking point had arrived. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something far bigger than himself. And for the first time since the invasion began, Caleb wondered if it was too late for humanity to survive. The storm was coming, and this time there would be no escape. The final stand. The night sky above Caleb felt vast and suffocating. A curtain of darkness pressed down by the shadow of the massive flagship looming on the horizon. The Dominion forces were preparing for battle, their movements sharp, mechanical, each soldier a cog in an unstoppable machine. But Caleb, standing at the heart of the camp with Vira by his side, felt something stir within him that he hadn't felt in days, a quiet but fierce determination. The air was thick with the tension of the impending clash, and Caleb's mind raced with the weight of what was happening. This wasn't just about his survival anymore. This was bigger than him, bigger than Vira, and it was about the future of everything he had ever known. "Stay close," Vira murmured, her voice low but commanding. Her usual icy exterior was cracked, revealing something deeper beneath. Caleb could see the way her body had shifted in response to the arrival of Admiral Thorax, the terror she felt at the thought of what he might do, and yet there was no hesitation in her eyes as she turned to face the growing threat. The flagship above cast a deep shadow over them, its hull sleek and dark like the storm clouds rolling in. Caleb could hear the low hum of its engines, the sound of something huge descending, preparing for war. His heart beat faster, the adrenaline coursing through him, but there was a strange sense of clarity in his chest. He wasn't going to die without a fight. He wasn't going to let everything he had lost be for nothing. The Dominion soldiers, once so stiff and robotic, were now in a frenzy, scrambling to prepare for the impending battle. Vira's voice rang out above the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Set up the perimeter. Weapons ready." Caleb didn't need to be told twice. He moved toward the soldiers, grabbing a weapon from a nearby crate, a sleek, alien disruptor rifle, and quickly familiarizing himself with its weight. It was heavier than he expected, but he didn't hesitate. The fight for survival wasn't just about enduring the pain anymore. It was about using everything he had left to push back against the tide of destruction. The sounds of shouting and clanging metal filled the air as the soldiers positioned themselves around the camp. Vira had already moved to her position, her back straight and her eyes sharp as she directed the soldiers. Caleb had seen that same look in her eyes before, but now it was different, more focused, more resolute. She wasn't just a commander anymore. She was fighting for something more than the Dominion's cause. Caleb's fingers tightened around the disruptor rifle as he took his place alongside the soldiers. His breath was steady, his pulse a low drumbeat beneath the surface of his skin. He could feel Vira's presence close by, but he didn't look at her. There was no time for that now. In the distance, Caleb could see the silhouette of the Dominion flagship descending, its massive form blotting out the stars. The ground trembled beneath his feet as the ship landed with an almost eerie grace, its engines roaring like the sound of distant thunder. Caleb's heart raced, but he refused to let the fear take root. He had nothing left to lose. Vira's voice rang out again, her tone cutting through the air like a whip. "Prepare yourselves. Thorax will not show mercy." Caleb nodded, his jaw clenched. He wasn't afraid of Thorax. He had survived everything this war had thrown at him, and he would survive this too. A low rumble spread through the camp as the ground seemed to shift beneath them. Caleb felt the pressure building, an overwhelming weight that made his chest tighten. It wasn't just the ship. There was something else coming. He could feel it, a presence far more terrifying than any Dominion soldier. Then, like a predator emerging from the shadows, Admiral Thorax's towering figure emerged from the depths of the flagship. His skin, a deep indigo hue, glinted in the low light. His eyes were sharp, predatory, and when they locked onto Caleb, it was like the weight of the universe itself was pressing down on him. Caleb stood tall, refusing to shrink under the Admiral's gaze. He didn't have to fight this battle alone anymore. He had Vira by his side, and more importantly, he had something Thorax couldn't understand: humanity's unbreakable will. Thorax's voice boomed across the camp, his deep, rumbling tone sending a shiver down Caleb's spine. "So, this is the human who has defied the Dominion. You think you can stand against us? Against me?" Vira stepped forward, her voice calm but unwavering. "I have made my decision, Thorax. The Dominion's methods have failed. I will not be a part of this any longer." Thorax's eyes flickered with anger, but there was something else there too, something deeper, something Caleb hadn't expected to see: doubt. "You betray the Dominion, Vira," Thorax sneered, stepping closer to her. "You who have risen so high, what has your loyalty earned you, Commander?" Vira stood her ground, her posture unwavering. "I've learned that true loyalty isn't to a system, it's to what's right, and this is wrong." A long silence hung between them, the tension crackling like electricity in the air. Caleb watched the two of them, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. He could feel the weight of everything on the line, humanity's last stand against a force that had nearly destroyed everything. Then, with a swift motion, Thorax raised his weapon. "You will pay for your defiance." Before Caleb could react, Vira moved with lightning speed, drawing her own weapon and firing at Thorax's flank. The blast hit him squarely, sending him stumbling back, but it didn't take him down. Thorax growled, his skin flaring with energy as he activated his own weapon, and the battle between them began. The camp erupted into chaos. The Dominion soldiers moved forward, guns raised, but Caleb and Vira were already on the move, fighting back with everything they had. Caleb's heart pounded as he moved through the smoke and chaos, firing the disruptor rifle with deadly accuracy. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the future of humanity. Vira, fierce and unwavering, stood by his side, her movements precise and deadly as she took down soldiers left and right. Together, they made their stand, but the battle was far from over. Thorax's forces were relentless, and Caleb knew that they were up against a force greater than anything they had ever faced. In the midst of the battle, as the sky above them seemed to crackle with energy, Caleb caught a glimpse of Vira's eyes, a brief moment of connection amidst the violence. It was more than just a fight for survival. It was a fight for what was right. And as the final explosions lit up the sky, Caleb realized that this wasn't just the end of a battle. This was the beginning of something new, the beginning of humanity's rise, the beginning of a new future, one built on defiance, hope, and the unbreakable will to survive. Thorax would fall, and with him the Dominion's hold on Earth. This was just the beginning. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon for more amazing videos.